a song of justice, sing a song of praise to God. We will live a life of mercy, live a life of justice, live a life of praise to God. We will sing a song of mercy, sing a song of justice, sing a song of praise to God. We will live a life of mercy, live a life of justice, live a life of praise to God. We will sing a song of mercy, sing a song of justice, sing a song of praise to God. We will live a life of mercy, live a life of justice, live a life of praise to God.
A reading from the Gospel according to Matthew. The Pharisees went and plotted to entrap Jesus in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance with truth and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But Jesus was aware of their malice and said, "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this, and whose title?" They answered, "The emperor's." Then he said to them, "Give therefore to the emperor the thing that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away.
We sing Alleluia, Alleluia, Alleluia. We sing Alleluia, Alleluia, Alleluia.
So I can't see everyone in our little box form, but I thought this was a fun exercise to do at the 8:30, so I'll do it here too. Who loves taxes? Go ahead and raise your hand. I'm guessing not many of you did. Maybe a couple of you did. This is San Francisco, so all things are possible. But if you want to really entrap your opponent in a presidential debate, you raise the issue of taxes, right? We're actually seeing this right now. We're seeing two sides argue over the nature of taxes. One side saying, you've cut taxes on the wealthy, you've given them a huge tax break. And on the other side saying, you're going to impose new taxes on everyone. You're going to increase everyone's tax burden, the wealthy and the poor. It's going to be bad for everyone. And that makes good political sense when you're trying to cast your political opponent as an enemy. But why here? What's at stake here in this moment with Jesus and the Pharisees, and notably this other class of people that's mentioned, the Herodians? Who are the Herodians? So obviously the dimension of political occupation is present, and it's present by the presence of that third group, which is just mentioned in the margins there, the Herodians. These are the people who are collaborating with Herod, who is collaborating with Rome. And so there are people there ready for Jesus's response. They want to hear how he's going to answer this question, right? I want to give you a little bit of background about taxation in the empire because it's sort of helpful to understand. When we think of taxes today, we think of filling out our little IRS form every year, your 1080, whatever, shuffling it off. Maybe if you're unlucky, you get audited by the IRS. Not a fun experience, but okay, you're going to survive most of the time. That's not how it worked in ancient Rome. In ancient Rome, taxes were essentially sold to the highest bidder. People would actually bid on the privilege of taxing people. And so they would pay for the taxes up front, and then they would collect the taxes at any cost because their profit literally depended upon them collecting those taxes. So instead of something like a bureaucracy coming after you, it was more like the mafiosa coming after you. Tax collectors were not nice people, and it was not a pleasant enterprise. It wasn't even very systemic. There was a huge amount of corruption and exploitation involved in the practice. So bringing up taxes in any context was going to be supercharged, but bringing up here is especially charged. So by way of background, in the year 6 CE, the emperor imposed a census tax on the region, on the province of Judea. And then in 17 CE, we have a really unusual note. Tacitus in his Annals actually tell us that the provinces of Judea and Syria make a special appeal to the emperor to lessen their burden because it is so extreme. That is extremely unusual for a province to ask for relief from the source of its taxation. It's sort of an indication, an unusual indication of vulnerability. But there we go. That's how extreme the taxes are. So there's a kind of political occupation element here. The people in first century Judea are being taxed literally to death. They're losing their property. They can't feed their children. It's a big problem, right? And I've talked a little bit about that in more depth here, so I won't go into the details, but it's a huge problem. But there's another problem too, that Jesus kind of highlights in a fun, sort of playful way, actually, in this moment. There's also the issue of idolatry. So Roman currency wasn't just money, right? We might think of our own currency, and of course there are national symbols and national heroes, presidents, eagles, actually an ancient Roman symbol of power, but there we are. And maybe we'll see, in God we trust. Roman currency is a little bit different in that it doesn't point to a different God. It would be as if the presidents were called gods themselves, right? And if the currency pointed to those presidents directly, and if every new president issued new coins with their images on it and claimed that they were God, imagine how that would go down with people today. It probably wouldn't be the best situation. But if you're in ancient Rome and you are an emperor and you're overseeing an empire the size of the territorial United States, but you don't have a particularly efficient way to cast your propaganda, your message, then coins are a very efficient kind of marketing tool for the emperor. And we see this in very clear evidence in the historical record. We see one emperor, the Emperor Pertinax, he reigned in the year 193. He only reigned for about 3 months. But in that time, he struck 10 different forms of denarius. So that coin that Jesus asked to see, 10 different types in just 3 months, right? Caesar Augustus, who preceded Tiberius, the emperor who was reigning at the time of this gospel when Jesus was speaking, he reigned for 41 years. And during that time, he released as many as 100 different variety of denariuses. And there are major varieties and then there are lesser varieties. He issued like 30 major ones, but then there are all these fun commemorative denarii. And if that's confusing or kind of mind-boggling, just think of when the quarter in the United States went from the plain symbol on the obverse to all of the different states. And remember how you were waiting like every month to see what is the new state, right? And it took a couple of years actually to see all of them, to collect all of them. So imagine that that's changing all the time actually, and that change is connected to whatever message the emperor is trying to signal about his particular reign. So okay, that's the background. But the emperor who reigned at the time of this encounter with the Pharisees and the Herodians was a strange emperor in many ways, but one of the ways he was most strange is that he didn't seem to care very much for this kind of variety. He really only struck 2 to 3 different forms of denarii, Tiberius did. And the denarius that was most consistent during his reign is probably also the most ubiquitous coin found in the region in first century Judea in archaeological digs. because there were just so many issued during a very long period of time. And that coin is very discernible. It's very recognizable. It has two different images on each side. On one side, we see the bust of the emperor with a laurel crown around his head. Okay, and it contains an inscription. Jesus says, "What is the title?" That word is actually an inscription in Greek, and it reads, "Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus, himself also Augustus." And then on the other side, when we flip it, we see an image of a woman seated. Usually she's understood as the Pax Romana, as the divine embodiment of Roman peace, a peace that came through great military cost to the people who were subjugated by that peace. And around her is the inscription, Pontifex Maximus, high priest. Okay, so Jesus has just entered the city of Jerusalem in chapter 21. He's been proclaimed king. People have bowed down with palm branches at his feet, a symbol of both Judean and Roman victory of military conquest. There's great expectations about who this Jesus is going to be, and he heads straight for the temple. Right, it's the high feast of Passover. Tensions are high in the city. He's overturning the money-changing tables and making a really big to-do. And then there's this confrontation. And we get a sense that they really, really want to nail him here. This is not, there's no question, but that this question is designed to lead to charges of treason that will lead to execution, right? They want to kill him, and they make it abundantly clear. So he has a problem. He has a really big problem. But Jesus is very clever, and it's important for us to remember that he behaves, acts, talks, thinks like a rabbi in the first century. And like a good rabbi, he's presented with an impossible question because it implicates him. Either you say, no, you shouldn't pay taxes, and you become a criminal in the eyes of the empire, or you say, yeah, go ahead, pay all those taxes, and then you look like a collaborator, right, to your followers. So neither of them is a particularly good outcome. He recognizes this, and he does what any good rabbi would do. He turns the tables, he flips the script, and it only takes him two questions. And at the beginning of this whole scene, it seems like they have him in a vice grip, but it's like rhetorical jujitsu. It's like two questions later, and they're the ones who are on the spot, aren't they? And so he avoids those kinds of, the twin possibilities of criminal or collaborator. And he asks the Pharisees to produce a coin, which they do quite quickly. Probably not a great sign, because a denarius, we don't know exactly how much it was worth, but probably a day's labor, probably. Not something cheap, not something that just everyone's going to carry around with them in the marketplace every single day like an ordinary thing. And maybe not so much that you can just whip one out and show someone what's going on. So, okay, all right. These aren't just ordinary Pharisees. Maybe they're quite close to the Herodians, okay? We usually associate Sadducees with the corrupt temple elite who are, really screwing over the Jewish people at this time. But these Pharisees don't seem to be particularly lovely people, so here we are. So they produce the coin, which already kind of implicates them already. He doesn't even have to get them to say anything, just the gesture itself, right? And then his response, it just rhetorically corners them. He doesn't answer the question directly. He answers the question indirectly, but his answer is very telling. He says, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God's." And now, in the history of Christian interpretation, this has been mostly used to justify two things. One is Christians obeying foreign governments and paying their taxes dutifully. And we see this come up a lot in the pastoral epistles. There's a kind of justification mentality around that. We saw it during the earlier part of the Trump administration with the immigration debates. And remember the former Attorney General invoking the letter to the Romans, talking about obeying the earthly powers that God has appointed over us. So there's that line of thinking, which we actually see being exercised in the reference to impartiality. But there's another piece, which is about the separation of church and state. That's the other way that this is usually interpreted. And again, the idea that Jesus is actually just offering genuine advice. Go ahead, pay your taxes. It's okay. Give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, give to God the things that are God's. there might be some value in both of those positions, but I think there's a third position, which is a lot more interesting and probably more relevant, which is that ultimately Jesus is deliberately engaging in a little playful subversion. And I want us to imagine he has this coin, he asks to take it and to look at it. Imagine the look on his face as he's giving it back to them. How does he give it back to them? Maybe there's like a little wink and he's flicking at them, maybe he rolls it, I don't know, but pretty sure it wasn't the friendliest exchange in the world. And he knew that he was able to have them in that moment. The thing is, the Pharisees above all people understood that everything is God's. There is nothing which is not God's. The truth is, this Caesar, who associated himself with a specific value in this coin and assigned that value to real human lives in an empire where human life was commodified and traded, much as it was in America during the time of slavery. This same emperor deceived himself into believing that his image was more important than the image that God had imprinted upon all the other people around him, all the people of the empire whom he really didn't care about, the people who he imagined as discardable, the trash of the empire. So Jesus is really putting it to them, and he's really insisting that actually this lovely little coin of yours points out that you have forgotten how to honor the real image that needs to be honored. You're asking the wrong question. The question has nothing to do with whether or not we owe the emperor taxes. The question is, how are we advocating for the image of God in each other in order to build the kingdom among us? How are we building that realm of justice, of mercy, of prosperity and abundance where people can thrive and live? And that's really the question. So he turns the tables, he asks a completely different question, and it's a question that I think is as relevant today as it is then. I think we find ourselves in a really difficult situation today where we are also asking big questions about the relationship between the value of human life and the value of a dollar. With COVID, we're thinking about people's health versus the economy. Those are real categories that we're thinking in a way that's much more obvious than they have been in the past, even though I think those conversations aren't new. They're always been going on in the background. So there's ways in which Jesus's little subversive word is as relevant to us today as it was 2,000 years ago. And there's a lot for us to think about. That's not an easy question to answer. But in this all, I believe we have a good word that comes to us in a surprising way. And so I invite you, as we kind of move into this period of reflection, take a moment. What is that expression on Jesus's face as he gives the coin back?